Next up, we have a panel discussion facilitated by Shawn C. And the session title is Artists and Performers Staying Creative in COVID-19. So please join me in welcoming Shawn and his guest speakers. And as you do so, I will give a quick brief intro to each of the speakers. So first, our moderator, Shawn. Shawn is a local artist, filmmaker, and community organizer. His love for community and storytelling is seen in the intergenerational cooking show, Seconds Please. Chinatown Heritage Arts Projects figure Yat Yi Sam Lokbat, and making some inclusive futures for Chinatown with artist collective Aya. Moving on to our panelists, we have Nisha Patel. Nisha is an award-winning Indo-Canadian poet and artist. She is also the executive director of the Edmonton Poetry Festival. She has performed across Canada and the world, sharing her work on multiple tours and international features from Glasgow and Berlin to Seoul. She is also published in 2 chapbooks, Water and Limited Success. Her poetry speaks to themes of race, feminism, and identity, focusing strongly on her struggles and triumphs as a woman of color, and she currently holds the position of Edmonton's Poet Laureate. We also have Mustafa Rafiq. Mustafa is a multidisciplinary artist based in Treaty 6 land in Edmonton, Alberta. Their primary focus recently has been in exploring feelings connected with diaspora, gender expression, and alienation through sound art. They also promote shows under Sweaty Palms, which is, at its root, an organization based on amplifying comfort in community, space to create and show work amongst your peers. Next, we have Elsa Robinson. Elsa is an Edmonton-based mixed media artist, sculptor, and painter whose decades-long devotion to artistic practice has imbued her work with vibrancy, versatility, and an intuitive spiritual poignancy. Elsa is also a passionate and experienced arts educator who facilitates workshops for artists of all ages and experience levels. And last but not least, we have Becca Taylor. Becca is a multidisciplinary artist, youth coordinator, and curator of Cree, Scottish, and Irish descent. Her practice involves investigations of Indigenous community building and Indigenous feminisms through various mediums, including textiles, beading, and installation. She has a long history of working within the Aboriginal communities in Edmonton and Winnipeg, and she's part of the Ociciwan Contemporary Art Collective. Over to you, Shawn.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. I'm so honored and excited to be able to share space with many talented friends in the arts community here in Edmonton. And our group today comes from many different disciplines and practices. You know, when we talk about art, it's actually, you know, quite a diverse skill set, and the way that we actually do our art varies very differently, right? One of the really cool things that I think everyone in this group holds is our passion and our love for our using our own cultural backgrounds as part of like the root of our work. And so I'm so excited to have folks around the table to kind of discuss about their diverse practices and share a bit about what we've been kind of dealing through COVID-19. And so, yeah, just to start off the conversation, the question would be, how has COVID-19 impacted your arts practice and community? Maybe we'll start off with Nisha.
So I work mostly as a poet, but also in live events. And I think the main thing that's really affected us is that the transition to doing online events hasn't seen a corresponding kind of following of the same audiences. And not to get too technical, but a lot of our goals for the festival, a lot of our goals as artists are to have big audiences or consistent audiences. And it's been tough to get people to really tune in all the time, because suddenly we're competing with poetry events from across Canada and across North America. On the one hand, it's really great. We're finally seeing people come to these events who would never have done that before. But on the other hand, sometimes there are people who are really being left out because they're overwhelmed with everything going on around them, as well as all the events, but, you know, general circumstances. Without the added bonus of government support for artists and their livelihoods, a lot of people are very desperate trying to get into events and get paid and stuff like that. At the same time, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of requests for free or unpaid work as artists, and that continued on for quite a bit of time before it became apparent that it was unsustainable. And so I think as artists, like, we want to continue to have events that are accessible to everyone, but at the same time, we understand there are significant challenges in funding these events and keeping the momentum going, because now we're looking into a new season coming up, the fall and the winter season, and we're wondering whether it is sustainable to keep doing things online when sometimes our audiences have dwindled, or that they're not as committed as they might have been in person.
Thank you for that. How about you, Elsa? How's COVID-19 kind of impacted your practice?
Thank you, Shawn, and hello to everybody. My art practice, I would say the first thing that has happened to me with COVID-19 is the isolation that has really forced me inwards to do a lot of self-reflection. And that has been a major part of what's been happening for me. And that is also being reflected in my work. I'm taking a lot more chances and moving into areas that really I feel are really how I want to express with my art, which is different than how I've expressed before. And so it feels a little bit risky. The other thing that's happened to me is, of course, responding to the COVID, and also responding to the anti-Black racism sentiments that are so incredibly strong right now. And that has been extremely challenging. And also I feel that my response to that is also being channeled into my work and a new way that I want to express myself. I'm learning more. I've attended more workshops online and just had more time to pay attention to those types of things. So learning more about marketing on Instagram, learning more about copyright, how to deal with contracts that come along, and just having more time to get in touch with CARC and having them help me with the contracts that I'm trying to deal with, and just having the time to pay attention to those types of details. As Nisha mentioned, the whole issue of paying artists fairly is a big issue. And so it's nice to have the time to be able to focus on that and to get the professional advice I need to address those types of things. And just generally learning to participate online. It's still a bit daunting, but I think I've also explored more sculpture during this time. So just I'm more in studio than I am sort of online, but those are all the things that have been happening for me. Thanks.
How about you, Becca?
COVID's kind of the impacts of everything shutting down has both benefited and has created a lot of issues within my own practice and as an organization with Ociciwan. So Ociciwan was planning on opening up our art center on March 28th, and everything shut down a few weeks before that. So it really forced us, and in terms of like everything else shutting down around us, we as well just completely shut down because we weren't sure at that point, having spent months and months planning for this really large opening and celebration of finally having a physical space to exhibit art, really made us take a step back and really think about how we wanted to present work virtually. what does it mean to present work virtually? How does it change the physicality of work and the relationship we have physically to work within a space? So we kind of took that time, and instead of forcing ourselves to quickly come up with solutions and keep producing work and moving forward, we really allowed that time to just kind of really take a step back and really be really mindful about the way we wanted to move forward as an organization, which in turn allowed myself more space and time within my own individual practice to give time for thought, the way I was balancing my own independent practice as well as with the collective and that work that we were doing, and where the connections lie, and ultimately honoring that space and time. I mean, what is this, like almost 6 months, and we still haven't opened our space yet, but we're not upset about it, because we just have taken that time and space to really think about what does it mean to have this space, but also what does it mean to like create a safe platform virtually as well for both the artists and the community, and kind of really challenging ourselves to think about different accessibility needs on both platforms. So that's kind of where we're standing right now.
Thank you. And Mustafa?
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Shawn. It's been a weird time. I worked primarily in live music events for the last 4 or 5 years. And so having to put a lot of things on pause kind of threw my balance, my internal equilibrium quite off. It's been good though. In the last few years, personally, I've been trying really hard to find a better personal balance with money and my, the obsession of like being able to make enough money through art versus like, just getting enough, just to feed yourself and keep yourself going and that kind of thing. And with promoting shows, it became a little bit more of an obsession with the money for me. So it's been in many ways like a personal blessing that I had to put everything on hold and completely, it feels like, yes, go back to step one. Like, why am I doing this? What am I trying to achieve? What am I putting out when I organize under these conditions in my own life? So I also had a pretty bad injury a couple of months ago and ended up having surgery on my hand, which for me, when I'm not organizing shows, I'm a musician doing compositions and gigs and whatever. So it's been a lot of finding love and excitement in other things like cinema and reading and stuff like that. So I'm just kind of like in an incubator moment, I feel like, just kind of trying to pull energy from other places lately. As far as how it's affected my practice, it's really put a stop in everything that I love to do. And it's been challenging, but also I feel very fortunate that I can reflect and just think about everything else that's happening right now and how that is going to affect my art in the future.
Thank you for that. And I hope, I hope your hand is healing. I mean, I really feel for you there, because, if like, how do we as artists, many of us, we're not necessarily in the same industry and not in the same kind of working practices. So I think it's so important for us under the umbrella of arts to actually have these conversations so that we actually know what is happening with our livelihoods, really. Do you feel that that's actually happening since COVID-19? I mean, like Nisha mentioned, so many offerings out there and so many things, and there's, these points of like, a lot of people engaged, and now it's kind of, we're not entirely sure how it's going to be sustainable. So something that I wonder about, when I look at like arts infrastructure, is like the importance of solidarity between artists. And I'm wondering, do you guys feel that kind of movement like getting stronger or possibly dwindling as well?
For me personally, as someone who's been involved in the community for the last few years, it's, like I said, it's a place for me to take a step back from organizing. And by that nature, like, I get to support other people who are gearing up right now or trying to get those wheels turning. And for me, that's personally like a really exciting thing to see that there are people still like killing it. Just because me personally, I have to take a break from things. Doesn't mean I can't still be involved to whatever capacity I can. So I feel fortunate that there are folks still working, still doing cool stuff, but yeah.
Does anybody else want to chime in on that question of like whether or not they feel like, you know, the importance of like diverse artists that don't necessarily like all practice in one place, like whether or not there's more of a movement of artists that are getting together and understanding and standing with each other when it comes to arts and support?
I think it's been really interesting because one of my projects has been to found a South Asian artist collective that's national in nature for poets. And one of the things we're experiencing, one of the challenges is that although we have a national goal in mind, not all the funding really follows that model. There's still hyper-local opportunities. And so trying to get involvement from partners is sometimes very difficult for that kind of national involvement. And so instead, I feel like the system really prioritizes local commitment, and it can actually really hamper artists who don't have like-minded groups within their own city, who rely on these groups to come from other places, perhaps where their diaspora is stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of seeing across, you know, I think the idea of the collective, you know, I feel is strengthening right now, and I'm seeing more and more kind of like emerging young collectives like really stepping up and kind of really challenging a lot of these structures that exist within artist-run centers and artist-run culture, and kind of really challenging the notions of the hierarchical structure of them, really challenging some funders to be more open to the possibility of what it means to be collective run, what it means to have a physical space that's collective run, and everything. So I'm starting to see that more and more. Like, I do agree, I do find that they're still very localized, and we're having, I mean, the few national ones I know in the Indigenous contemporary art fields haven't been as active or have a harder time finding support as of recently. But it's interesting because I'm still seeing that collaboration happen within galleries, and these artists that are still working together actively during this time, even though they can't gather physically anymore, looking at different models of gathering by sharing texts with one another, mailing things to one another. Some are, I mean, it's a little bit easier, I feel like, when you're in the prairies, but just jumping in your car and meeting someplace in between, I'm seeing that. And being kind of back on the land, I'm seeing a lot more as well with a lot of these artists and practices. And I mean, even myself, I noticed this summer I was on the land way more often than I wasn't, meeting folks just outside of the cities and supporting each other through our making processes as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because at the beginning I kind of mentioned that, you know, we all have different cultural backgrounds, and you know, I think it's, you know, very rooted in our practice. So it would be great to share, you know, from our different practices, how culture has kind of influenced the way that we create. Yeah, it would be great to hear, Elsa. You know, how does that kind of influence your practice?
Wow, that's a huge question, Shawn. How does culture influence my practice? Wow. Oh my goodness. I would say that, well, first off, I'm Jamaican, raised, Canadian born, Jamaican raised. And so I would say I'm at a point in my life where both sides influence my art practice. And of course, my main cultural heritage from Jamaica is African as well. So I connect really strongly in that way as well. Well, I would say, so in those terms, there are elements of culture that come into the work as I'm working. I think that coming from Jamaica, where we don't deal with the type of racism that happens here, one of the things that's really impacting the experience of being a Black person in Jamaica is totally different than being one here in Canada. In Jamaica, I'm Elsa Robinson. In Canada, I'm Black. So that's a huge challenge to work with on a daily basis. So I think that because of a lot of different issues culturally and having the type of identity formation that I had prior to coming here, I tend to, and also based on my own reading and my own study, I tend to come from a political position of Black feminism and touched in Afrofuturism, Afro-surrealism. So, and an artistic practice that focuses on liberation and celebration of strength, celebration of, right now, particularly focused on women, from African culture, Jamaican culture, African diaspora culture, expressing that through sewing and quilt making in my work. So those are just different ways that the culture is affecting me and affecting my viewpoint in terms of what type of art I want to make, why I'm making the art, the purpose of the art, and the messages that I'm trying to bring in that way. So my work is not necessarily, my work does not at all sort of try to reflect Jamaican society in that sense. I'm more into various political viewpoints and trying to promote those political viewpoints. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Elsa. I realized that I kind of asked such a broad question, but you answered it so beautifully. Maybe to narrow in a bit more so others can chime in. You know, we have a lot of viewers that are, you know, in high school or are students, and they're probably just, and many of them newcomers as well, born and raised here like myself. I'm Chinese Canadian. But it took a while for me to actually tap into really appreciating my own culture. And I don't know whether, you know, I think a bit of that is because, you know, being raised in a Canadian system, there's no there's no way for me to like research about my own identity, except for my parents and what my parents told me, right? And so I had to actually go out and do that myself. And so I'm curious to hear from others. Like we heard from Elsa that, you know, she has narrowed in on some like political movements and feminism and you know, those are some things that really that she's passionate about to do that research. Is there something from the other artists where, you know, you would encourage other people to look into if they're curious about their own culture? Are there ways to kind of tap into that and link that to artistic practice? Becca?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting conversation to me because I guess I'm kind of under the mindset that the work I create is Indigenous because I'm Indigenous, so it's inherently Indigenous. But I think this is such a complex conversation to have in terms of practice and how we create work. I mean, I was privileged enough to be raised a lot within my culture to a degree. Like I am definitely like an urban Indigenous person who grew up in the city, you know, and I did I was privileged enough to have some techniques taught to me over the years, just through like my aunties and my family members, like my kin groups, like beading, moksa making, and all these activities we had to participate in as children to get our regalia ready every year, and all those things, which I don't think at the time I realized why they were teaching it to us. Like, I think it almost became like a chore to me back then, because we just had to do it. It was like part of getting ready. We had to help with certain tasks, same with like hunting and gathering every fall, you know, but those lessons, like my relationship to my family just completely influences my practice in every possible way. And even though I don't necessarily practice, I hate using this term, but I guess what people would view as traditional practices necessarily is, but I think it's for each generation to kind of determine for themselves, like in our case, like what does indigeneity mean to you as a generation, as a person? You know, I think it's important to learn of our past, but I think it's also important for us to kind of view how that has a relationship in our current climates within our own practices and our own selves, you know, because I think tradition's fluid, and this is how it is fluid, because it leaves room to learn and practice, but also move forward in the generations to come. So it's a continuation, moving forward continuously.
Nisha or Mustafa, anything that you guys want to chime in on?
I think it's very profound for a person to connect with some supposed like heritage or ancestry in a lot of different ways. But I think what Rebecca is telling us is basically like, if you come from a certain culture and you are practicing art in any discipline, that becomes what other people will inherit, right? That becomes part of your family practice. That becomes part of your ancestral practice as well. And so I think it's important to recognize that there are multitudes of ways we express connection to one's culture, and that those forms can change as long as, of course, we're respectful about the origins and understand where they're coming from. Because obviously there's cultural forms of art that have adapted to different groups who practice in different cities, or practices that were brought from homeland to places like Canada. But I also think I don't think it's healthy to overly romanticize ancestral homeland, because some of those places were not places we left by choice, and they were not places that were safe. So for me to write about feminism in Canada is a privilege that's afforded, because trying to do so back home would often get me, shunned by a lot of the society. Not to say there isn't progressive movement back in India, but it's a very different life. And so the context of that is that here, the art that I'm doing here matches the life that I have here, or the boundaries of what I'm capable of here. And that's not always going to be the same to some perceived idea of what it means to be an Indian person.
I really don't have too much to add. I'm just kind of chewing on and reflecting what everyone has said so far. So thanks to the three of you. That's really beautiful.
I guess one thing I would like to say, especially to younger artists, that I've been really thinking about this identity. And the thing about being an artist, you're an artist first. You're an artist first. The upbringing that you have had, the cultural experiences that you've had, whether coming from your parents' culture, if you are an immigrant, or if, when I say immigrant, I mean that you're first generation Canadian, because this immigrant thing can go on a bit too long. But if you're coming from a culture from outside of Canada, right? You will automatically, it's the nature of an artist to think deeply about a lot of different things. That's our nature. And so we do explore to find information about, if you want to find information about your culture, aspects of your culture, aspects of Canadian culture, how you want to tie that all together. It's the same as then some kids, when I used to teach, children would say to me, when I'm at home, this my parents' culture. When I'm at school, I'm Canadian culture. I have to work between the two. When you become an artist, you're still working between the two. And you're selecting which pieces of either of those two things, or myriad of things, that you want to bring to speak with when you are making your art. But the most important thing is to remember that there are no rules about, oh, well, if you're a Black artist, you should do things this way, because we get labels. And then the labels are very dangerous for us, because like I said, my name is Elsa Robinson. I'm an artist. A lot of people would say, oh, she's a Black artist, but that's just this they're talking about. They're not talking about anything inside of me. They're not talking about the fact that I'm from Jamaica. They're not talking about my education status. They're not talking about my family origin. They're just talking about the color of my skin. And so sometimes society places all kinds of expectations of us as artists on the labels that they give us. And so what we have to remember as artists is that we are individuals who are called to make art and to do that art in the way that we see is the best way for us. So, if you decide to do sculpture, you decide to do whatever it is you decide to do, right? And you don't have to feel like there are certain rules just because somebody's labeled you. You don't have to feel that there are rules that say you have to fit into, I'm this kind of artist, or, somebody say, I've had it too many times. Oh, you're from the Caribbean. No wonder you use bright colors in your work. It's rubbish. Van Gogh used bright colors in his work. He's not from the Caribbean, So we really have to be aware of ourselves as individuals and as artists. And then you decide, based on your reading, your heritage, everything, what it is that you want to bring in your message, in your work, and you go forward with that. That's the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Elsa. We're getting close to, I think, the end, but to tie back, I feel like COVID-19 actually, we're talking about culture. It's something that we all have, resiliently, I guess, included into our culture, our joint culture, our collective culture. And so trying to stay positive about these things and, probably picking up a lot of new skills, technology. Would you like to share maybe some of the things that you think either you want to do with some of the skills that you've picked up through COVID-19 or are already doing as a result of COVID-19 within your art practice? Maybe Rebecca, would you like to share?
Sure. I'm not sure, to be quite honest. I mean, I think it comes back to what I was saying before about accessibility. I think that's where I'm really challenging myself, thinking about, I think as we move forward, say we end up in a world again that doesn't have COVID, or, I'm just kind of curious about accessibility for other folks, because there's certain people that are really thriving in this climate. They're really thriving with not having to be out in public as much, and they're able to participate in a lot more things because it's online. So I guess I'm just kind of taking a lot of that with me as well, about how do we still include folks who just don't feel comfortable in physical spaces or don't feel comfortable in gatherings, without losing the importance of being present in some works and that physical connection to work, So I guess I'm trying to think through that a lot. And is there barriers in physical space that we can also change. Like, what does it mean to go completely scent-free in a space so those who have sensory issues feel more welcome, or how do we adjust lights for folks who want to come in? So I've been thinking a lot about that, I guess, as I move forward, is how do we take our lessons learned from this time and become more inclusive, if possible, within these spaces?
Nisha, would you like to?
Yeah, I think what I've learned the most is that uh, an artist who is committed to connecting with people will still find ways to connect with them. It might take a little bit more work on our part, but eventually we find a medium and a rhythm that works for us. There is a learning curve with moving things online and moving things into remote spaces, but I've had some really beautiful shows over quarantine with audiences I would have never been able to see in person. And so I think there's some really beautiful things that happened, and really necessary learnings about accessibility, and being able to give access to people who have traditionally been left out of artistic spaces and recognize the contribution of their presence in a way that we can continue to build on in the future.
I'll go next. My answer is real simple. I think that this time has allowed me to become a little bit closer to the arts community. My whole plan for this year was to really get out there and go to shows and do everything. And then COVID came and that just all got shut down. So that's really, I think as a visual artist, that's really affected us more in a way than poets or musicians. I just feel that way. So for me, it's marketing is just continuing to work on the online presence, continuing to use the technology, and continuing the studio practice and all of that. I'm just hoping, maybe some online shows, I don't know, but just hoping that, just getting ready for when all of this is over and having bodies of work that I can show. Mm-hmm.
For myself, I've been feeling very disconnected from art in general. So it's been just a big moment of patience, just like knowing that I'm not feeling creative right now. But hopefully those feelings will pass. So I'll have that energy again someday. And yeah, I think it's just an exercise and a challenge in patience right now for me personally. I'm just gotta keep working on other things in my life and just like giving myself that love and that space to grow. And I mean, that's right. We know that's just as vital for the artist spirit, just to like give ourselves that room to grow. And so I think that's where I'm at right now. Just gotta take a step back, do some other stuff.
Thank you so much, everyone, for this really, really enriching discussion. Jeff, do we still have a little time, or? Yeah, okay. Well, my last question I wanted to ask was for Mid-Autumn, there's certainly like for the Chinese folks like myself, we have a lot of really cool celebratory things that happen. I'm curious for you folks, do you guys have your own things that you look forward to for autumn? Anything special that you do? It would be, cool to hear. For example, like I love eating mooncakes, and so that's something that I definitely look forward to during the Mid-Autumn time. Does anybody like to share about their exciting autumn things that they look forward to?
We do, this is our time of year of harvesting and gathering and just preparing everything, hunting. My father goes hunting a lot this time of year, and it's nice because we kind of come together as a family to prepare food for the winter months and to share with our community. I mean, it looks a bit different this year because we can't have everybody over at our house, but it's still wonderful to see us thinking about nourishment of the body and being able to pass it on to community members who could need support during this time as well. So yeah, this is kind of our season for preparation for the winter and just nourishing our bodies as much as possible.
Traditionally, there's usually a really big festival that we struggle to put on every year here in Edmonton with thousands of Gujarati people. And every year we need a bigger and bigger venue. I was wondering what was going to happen this year. And of course, it's postponed or canceled, whatever you want to call it. And in India, this festival goes on for 9 days in a row. Everyone gets the time off and we dance every single night. And here in Edmonton, we usually spread it out over a few different weekends, a few days here and there. And I think there are people that I only see at this festival, and I think I will feel it in my heart this year that this will not be an opportunity that I will have.
Okay, I'll go next. Well, being from Jamaica, we don't really have a autumn celebration, but we do have our independence. We had our independence celebration in August. Actually, the first celebration we have is Emancipation Day, and that's celebrating the end of slavery in Jamaica and throughout the British Empire. And so that's celebrated in Jamaica on August 1st. And then after that, we have an independence celebration that is celebrated on August 6th. And in Jamaica, independence is, it's almost like we have dance competitions, music competitions, art competitions. We have a myriad of competitions that all culminate at the Independence Week celebration. We have street parades, everything. So that's our big deal in August, and it's really a huge deal. And we have children from age 3 all the way up to elders of whatever age participating in all kinds of competitions and performances throughout the island. And it's a lot of, it's culturally just the supreme time to be in Jamaica, because that's when you see all of the folk songs and everything is at its highest. All of cultural practices like that are at their highest and most beautiful. So that's my memory for August / fall, because of course in Jamaica we don't have fall, we don't have all of these things, so it's summer all the time. Mm-hmm.
I'm getting excited just to cook for my friends and like my family. That's kind of just a new personal tradition, I guess, is just having people over when the weather starts getting cold, being able to fill everyone's bowl up and share some space and like some laughs. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm really looking forward to in the next couple months, is having people in my space, having their energy bounce off my walls and, you know, stay here for when they're gone and I don't get to see my friends very often. Yeah, just excited to share food with people.
Well, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. I've had such a wonderful time and learned so much, and I really hope that there's more of these opportunities for us to have these discussions. I just learned so much, and I can say for sure, like sometimes I do feel like I'm in a bubble, and even more so with COVID-19. So it's just refreshing to be able to kind of expand and hear from all our, you know, really awesome arts folks and connect and kind of reflect, because yeah, we certainly